a lot of ways because we're asleep at the wheel. There are energies that are manipulating us, and that's kind of what we're seeing on a lot of different levels of the micro and macro. So how this plays out is going to be interesting, and I think is anybody's best guess. You know, one of the things that the Star Nations do say is, you know, we have free will down here, and we have dominion in this particular realm. So we've reached a particular level in human ascension and simultaneous time convergence that there really isn't a lot to predict in terms of probability. We have now moved into levels where the third dimensional Earth has pulled in fourth dimensional frequency and fifth dimensional frequency. So many of us, if you've noticed, the physics of the energy is shifting. So our orientation to time-space is shifting. So those of you that may have remembered, when you were working at a third dimensional level of consciousness, there was a certain level of manifesting money, doing what you did on your day-to-day level. And most of that is now shifting and changing. You'll find that as you move into the higher energy centers, what you did in the third dimensional identity will not work for you anymore. And you have to learn now to work with new energies that have a completely different way of interacting with your being and learn how to manifest at that level. So we're now starting to get into the fourth and fifth dimensional levels. Mostly a lot of that energy is now on the planet, the third dimensional planet itself. And this changes the way we manifest into instant manifestation. So you may have noticed a lot of us have been in manifestation school, which is we have to be fully responsible for our thoughts and our emotions in terms of what we create because our manifestations are coming a lot quicker now. So this is a byproduct of moving into simultaneous time as these dimensions are starting to collapse and merge with each other, and we're about, a lot of the planet now, in certain pockets anyway, has quite a lot of fourth and fifth dimensional energy, so we're starting to feel a lot of the shifting. And what's interesting for me is now this is my world, so I wonder what the third dimensional people are feeling, but what I do tend to observe in the beings that have not been seeking this information out or developing their soul, or they're just caught in the status quo of the third dimensional world, is a lot of pressure. A lot of pressure and chaos. This seems to be happening at a much more increased speed, and I think that this will force most of the human race at some point is going to have to make some changes and adjustments because the energy is only going to increase. So we're starting to really see it, I think, more in the third dimensional world, in the corporate structures where people are really starting to see there's this feeling there isn't enough time to get what you need done during the day. Time feels like it's collapsing. And that's because we're still stuck in the mind construct, which is very third dimensional, that this is what we have to do in order to be productive and to survive instead of learning how to be in our beingness. So that's what we're leaving. If we could sum up third dimension, it would be the state of doing and imposing your will. The fourth and fifth dimensional energy is the state of being and aligning to divine will. So you have to learn to align to the divine will and the divine language. It's like learning a whole different language, and that's very hard for those of us that were born into a third dimensional construct and told since birth, this is how it is. This is what reality is, to make money, to survive here, this is what you gotta do. And we're finding that a lot of those old structures are not working for us anymore. And I think as we move forward, we're gonna start to see a lot of crumbling of these structures being dismantled because there's no other choice. We're being forced to evolve and adapt and change, and we're going to have to find a way to do that. So the Indigos, the Indigo races are here to lay the new structures. So like our Indigo children, many of them have been called system busters, and that's because they are. They're here to help dismantle the old structures and to find new creative resolutions, in particular new ways of doing, which again is more, let's say, in terms of using energy, more mutually beneficial. We've been in a system of power taking, which is very 3D, service to self, living out of harmony with our true self by actually living service to self. This is really exemplifying service to others and knowing that as you serve others, you also reap the greatest abundance in that energy exchange. And this is, of course, principles of energy. You know, it sounds like for a lot of people sort of spiritual mumbo jumbo, but it's not. It's a the way it's been described to me and the way I'm seeing it over and over in terms of patterning, it's an energy physic reality that we have to change our mindset because we're leaving again this level of intelligence and moving into higher levels of intelligence within ourselves. So it's interesting to note, again, with each dimension and with each level of energy that we accrete and bring into our light body, we are bringing more and more intelligence of our divinity, our God self, our God being that is connected to the greater universal structures of God intelligence into our awareness, which is, again, a lot more intelligent than the 3D conscious mind ego construct, which really doesn't know what's going on. It just perceives a beginning and an end, and it has no idea how it's going to solve problems. But Source does. So this is what we have to learn, how to create that connection into our higher self and soul and develop our higher sensory perception and our divinity, which actually is an intelligence. So to kind of, I always thought that was interesting to think of it in those terms. So again, with indigos too, I know I gave that little background because I know some of you, it helps you to put into the framework of why indigo souls are here, why they are a genetic phenomena as well as a spiritual one, that there's something very, let's say, technical in terms of how DNA and genetic works and to the importance of the spiritual evolution, the path of evolution for the human species, period. And that's why the indigo groups are here to actually provide that particular level of service, contribution to the planet and to the species in terms of its whole evolution. So one of the things I also wanted to talk about was that last year we went through something called the Indigo Deployment. And so in 2006 they started to discuss that there were groups of people, the indigos that had not been awakened or aware of their certain soul purposes at that particular time. We're going to get a radical wake-up call. And this was, the theme of 2006 was called the deployment. And so this deployment, it's kind of a funny way to say it, but was literally like an aggressive awakening of all of the beings that were either indigo or star seeded or had soul contracts to work with higher evolution at whatever level. So you would begin a very deep awakening and clearing. And 2006, if you hadn't been woken up at that period of time, they were going to shake you. We were going to start to get some really intense wake-up calls. And that generally means, if it translates, is that your life is changed on a dime and the things that used to work just don't work anymore. So generally how spirit or the universe gets your attention is something that we call a dark night of the soul period, where all of a sudden you look up and you realize that your reality is completely changing and shifting from underneath you, and it feels like all of the old identity structures that you had, the ways you used to work, your housing, your relationships, whatever, start to change. And you realize that your whole life, it's almost as if the forces of transformation have come into your life and something else has mandated this change, and you're there trying to figure out what the heck is going on with your life. So this is the deployment. And this is to get all of us to a level of clearing our ego, our will to impose our own will or understanding of what's going on, and learn how to surrender to something larger than ourselves, which is really our soul and spirit. But we have to go through a process of learning how to listen to the soul language, what it means to communicate with the divine matrix, which is intelligence everywhere. Some of us will be chosen to be contacted by spiritual hierarchy, by star nations, who knows, that's not everybody's role, but at some level you start to develop a different level of cellular knowingness and higher sensory perception, and these are aspects of soul function. These are soul functions. So as you start to embody your soul, you start to leave your personality matrix. And if you don't understand what's happening to you, it can be kind of frightening. And that's why, of course, I like to keep this information available, because a lot of us are doing this right now. We are leaving the old constructs and we're moving into a higher reality system, and the physics are changing, and our brain does not know how to make sense of it because it's not logical. You can't think your way out of it. You have to feel your way out of it. And most of us have forgot how to feel. So we have to learn how to turn that back on, and during that process it can be a little frustrating or confusing. So in 2006 we had something again called a deployment, and they started to say this was going to be a very intense ascension wave, and that there were going to be 3 main typings of indigos that were going to start to emerge from this group. And again, each one of us has a very unique and particular soul purpose, but this was kind of a way to kind of group it, another way to kind of again apply and make sense to some of it. Now what I've noticed with the Indigo typing is that those of us that have agreed to leadership or stewardship may relate to all of them, because we're asked to master each one of those levels. It depends where you're at in your soul agreement and what you're here to do and kind of exchange at this time. But just again to kind of share that with you, through that ascension wave, they gave me 3 types. And the indigos that were in type 1 are more of the workers of the frequency hubs. Right now, we are moving into the second part of the ascension plan, which is about intentional communities. So we're starting to hear a lot of dialogues about communities, sustainable, off-the-grid, intentional communities. This is a movement by Indigo Ones. A part of the purpose of the Indigo Ones in doing this is to create informational but also frequency hubs that are grounded into certain demographics on the planet that are meant to stabilize it. Because as we move forward with incredible amounts of frequencies getting pummeled on the planet, and again, I say this too, I want to be sure that there is nothing to fear at all. We have an amazing connection that's going on here, but the issue is that if you don't know how to connect and you don't have a framework of what is happening, it can appear very frightening. So it's extremely important now to learn how to connect to the inner levels of your reality rather than rely on the external reality, because the external reality is going to get more chaotic. We're going to see some pretty bizarre things, and we already are. We're already seeing some very surreal things going on with, let's face it, in the government, in terms of freedoms being taken left and right. I mean, it's become like common. Every day there's some new freedom that's being built, that's, been taken on. So right now we're going to start to see a lot of bizarre things externally. And so it's extremely important, I think, to develop, again, the inner connection and the trust and faith of your own spiritual guidance, and know that you will be guided to be exactly where you need to be. But again, you must learn the language of that connection, and you need to override the ego. So the discernment becomes, is it the higher self or is it the ego that's talking to me? And in the beginning stages of your spiritual development, this is one of the important things you must learn to discern. The difference between the higher intelligence and the lower intelligence of the desire body, or the impulses that come from the mind, which are mostly fear-based. Also, it's important to do this because there's a lot of scalar programming that is put into the fields with carrier waves of fear and other kinds of mind control devices. So when you learn to develop your spiritual body, you will not be subject to the scalar mind control programs that a lot of the beings still are. If you are pretty much in the rat race and you're just on the treadmill and you're trying to catch up and you've got your mortgage and your 2 kids, it's going to be really hard to stay out of the mind control, because the pressure cooker and the chaos is just going to build. And as you know, that's one of the thwarting tactics of distraction. Don't look here, look over there. Look over there. You can see our world is externally creating incredible amounts of stimulus between our, technology, the obligations that we feel we owe to others. I mean, it goes on and on. It's really challenging to just be in a state of union with yourself these days, and that is really no accident. So we have to be very clear about carving the time for ourselves and becoming a master of our own life, and it starts with this. I highly suggest every day that you take meditation time in the morning and in evening if you can, and try to work on this connection by cultivating it continually and making it a